I wore black that day, not out of tradition, but because it was the only color that didn't feel like a lie. My body was still healing. My silence, too. They had said we could keep it small, just family. They said they wanted to remember her, not dwell on what was lost. But no one remembered what I lost. I sat near the front, holding the folded paper I'd rewritten 5 times. It was supposed to be a goodbye. To my baby. To the future I'd already begun to imagine. But even as I stood behind the podium, I knew my grief had an expiration date in their eyes. Mom dabbed her eyes with a neatly folded napkin. Dad stared at the wall like he'd already moved on. And my sister, Anna, wore white, of all colors. A soft, flowing dress that curved at her belly. I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to. She kept rubbing it absent-mindedly, like it was some kind of gentle punctuation. And every time she did, the room shifted, eyes turned, whispers started. My eulogy became background noise to something newer, finished quickly. The words felt like wet paper in my mouth. Nobody clapped, but someone cleared their throat. It was Anna. "Before we leave," she said, her voice as sweet and airy as always. "I just wanted to share some hope with everyone. Something joyful after so much sadness." I didn't look at her. I couldn't. The room gasped. Some even clapped. Someone cried. But not for me. I felt Mom touch my arm. "She didn't mean to steal your moment," she whispered, like that was something I could fold up and keep. As if this moment was ever mine to begin with. That night, I sat at the edge of the bathtub, letting the water run cold. Her announcement echoed louder than the heartbeat I never got to hear. I thought about the tiny socks I had tucked in a drawer, still with tags, still folded. I hadn't told anyone I kept them. They would have said I was being dramatic. They always say that. Don't. They? Even when I was little, when Anna broke the snow globe my grandmother left me, they said I was being dramatic. She didn't know it was important, they said. She's just a kid. And now, she didn't mean to hurt you. She didn't know you were still healing. She was just excited. Always an excuse. Always her moment. I didn't go to the family lunch afterward. I stayed behind at the chapel and cleaned the leftover tissues and programs. The man locking up gave me a sympathetic smile, but sympathy felt like a cheap coat that didn't fit anymore. I walked home, didn't take the car, didn't answer the calls. When I got home, I opened the drawer and held the socks for a while. Then I slid them behind the photo albums. Out of sight. But not out of memory. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger takes energy. And I was tired. But I felt something new begin to stretch in my chest. Not resentment. Not grief. Just a quiet decision. To never let them borrow my silence again. It wasn't always this way. At least I tell myself that sometimes. That once there was a time when I was seen. But memory's a strange thing. It folds around what you wish had been true, until one day, the real shape begins to show. I remember being 6, watching Anna open her 3rd birthday present while mine still sat unopened in my lap. I remember how Mom leaned in and whispered, "Just let her have this one. She's been fragile lately." She'd had a stomach bug. I just won a math award. One earned a cupcake tower and balloons. The other got a pat on the back and dishes to dry. It started small, like all things. A little tug here, a little silence there. By the time I was 13, it had become my job to be understanding. Anna cried easily. Anna didn't like confrontation. Anna needed space. So I learned to give and give and give until I mistook absence for kindness. The day I told them I was pregnant, I didn't get the reaction I imagined. No wide smiles, no happy tears. Just Dad looking vaguely concerned, Mom asking if I was sure, and Anna blinking like she didn't understand what she was hearing. She was quiet the whole dinner. Picked at her salad, kept glancing at me with something unreadable in her eyes, and then, just 2 weeks later, I caught them whispering on the back patio. Anna's voice carried when she was emotional, always had. "I just don't get why she had to do it now," she said. "She knows I've been trying." I remember standing in the hallway, barefoot, holding a bowl of fruit I never ended up serving. It hit me like a glass wall. All that smiling she'd done when I told them. It wasn't support. It was loss. Not mine. Hers. When I lost the baby, I didn't tell them for 3 days. I sat in that cramped emergency room alone, waiting on blood tests. It was sterile, fluorescent. The kind of quiet that hums instead of comforts. The nurse had kind eyes. She asked if someone could come pick me up. I said no. I took a taxi back. The driver didn't speak, but I appreciated that. When I walked in the door, Anna was painting her nails, bright coral. She said it was for some vacation they were planning, a baby moon, even though they weren't pregnant yet. She didn't ask why my eyes were red, or why I was walking like my body didn't belong to me. That night, I told them in a whisper, like it was a secret they'd want to keep. Mom nodded slowly. Dad rubbed his temple like it was an inconvenience. Anna hugged me stiffly, said, "I'm sure it just wasn't meant to be," and asked if I wanted her last slice of pie. I said no. I went to bed. Now I wonder, how long had they been waiting to erase it? Not even a month had passed before Anna's stomach began to show. The announcement at the chapel wasn't spontaneous. The white dress, the well-practiced tone, it had all been planned. She stole my goodbye and made it her beginning, and they let her. Last night, I finally answered Mom's text. It had been 2 days. Don't be mad at Anna, she just wanted to bring the family some light. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I typed back, "Tell her to keep it. The light. The family. All of it." And I turned my phone off. Not in rage. Not to prove anything. Just because the silence finally felt like mine. I stopped checking the group chat. They kept sending updates, ultrasound photos, registry links, countdowns to baby showers, and gender reveals. At first, I told myself I was just taking a break. But then, I realized I was counting how many days I could go without hearing her name. 3 became 5, then a week, then longer. No one noticed. The apartment still smelled faintly like the lavender bath soak I'd used the night I came back from the hospital. It clung to the corners of the tiles, the sleeves of my sweaters, the blanket I never folded. One evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea I never drank and stared at the trees outside. The leaves were starting to dry and curl. Nature's quiet way of letting go. Not dramatic, not loud, just necessary. I scrolled through my photos. There weren't many. One of the pregnancy test, a blurry image of the tiny socks in my hand. and a mirror selfie, half in shadow, where I was just beginning to show. I didn't delete them. I moved them to a hidden folder called Spring. They called 3 times that week. Mom, mostly. Each voicemail sounded more confused than the last. Just check in once, sweetheart. Anna's worried about you even if she doesn't say it. Don't let this come between us. Between us, as if this wasn't a funeral hijacked and grief buried beneath a baby bump. The first invitation arrived in the mail the following Friday. A thick envelope with gold lettering. Join us in celebrating the upcoming arrival of baby Elena. They'd already named her. Elena. My middle name. I held the envelope like it might catch fire in my hands. No one asked me. No one thought to. They just assumed I'd be flattered. Honored, even. Anna had a knack for recycling other people's things, even their grief. I didn't go to the shower. Instead, I booked a weekend away. A quiet inn up north, where the signal was weak and the air smelled like pine and rain. The woman who owned it gave me a room with a window facing the lake. When she asked what brought me there, I said I needed some stillness. She just nodded, like she knew. That night, I watched the storm roll in over the water. The thunder was soft, like a warning whispered from far away. I turned my phone over, didn't check the texts. Didn't open the photos they probably sent of balloons and cupcakes and matching family shirts. Instead, I opened a notebook I'd packed but hadn't touched in months. And for the first time since the hospital, I wrote down her name. The one I'd chosen. The one no one else had heard. I wrote it slowly, like an offering. Then I closed the book and didn't cry. When I came home, I stopped forwarding my mail. Let them wonder where I went. Let them realize, slowly, that I had never really left. I had just taken myself back. A month passed before I heard from Dad directly. His voice was tight on the phone, like he didn't know how to talk to me without my mother translating my silence. He asked if I'd come to the family dinner next Sunday. He didn't say it was Anna's birthday, but I knew. I think it'd mean a lot to her, he added. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at my calendar. There was nothing written on it. Still, I said no. Just that. No. No excuse. No apology. And I waited. He sighed. A sound I knew too well. Like I was disappointing them again, just by choosing myself. All right, he mumbled. If that's what you want. But it wasn't about what I wanted. It was about what I couldn't do anymore. I used to think that family was a structure you couldn't leave, like a house you're born into and have to keep repairing, no matter how much the ceiling leaks. Now I think it's more like a rhythm, and I had stopped dancing to theirs. Later that week, I took the small storage bin out from the hallway closet. Inside, the gifts I'd bought in secret when I first found out I was pregnant. A yellow knit blanket, a children's book with watercolor, animals, the tiny socks still untouched. I set them out on the bed, one by one, not to mourn, not this time. I was choosing what to let go. The book I kept. The blanket I gave to the neighbor down the hall, who was expecting twins and always smiled at me in the elevator. The socks. I left them folded on the steps of the chapel. The same place where Anna made her announcement. No note, no explanation, just a quiet memory returned to the silence they never let me have. Anna messaged me a few days later. Saw the socks. Was that you? I didn't reply. Not because I was being cruel, but because she would never understand the answer. They mailed me a photo from the birthday dinner, everyone smiling. Anna's belly round beneath another white dress. Mom had scribbled something on the back. You were missed, but I wasn't. Not really. What they missed was my compliance. The way I filled in the quiet space between their louder joys. The way I let myself be the background. One morning, I woke up and realized it had been 46 days since I'd spoken to any of them in real time. It didn't feel empty. It felt like breathing with my own lungs. For the first time. I started painting, again. Nothing special. Mostly gray-blue landscapes and faceless figures with their hands folded. It wasn't art for display. It was art for recovery. For returning to the self they never wanted me to claim. And slowly, the boundaries built. Themselves, not loud, not angry, just real. I didn't tell them about the new job I took. Didn't send the address when I moved into a different apartment. And when Anna finally gave birth, I didn't go. She named the baby Elena. I knew she would. Mom texted me a photo from the hospital. Anna in bed, smiling, holding a small, swaddled girl in pink. The caption said, "She's perfect. Wish you were here." I didn't open the image. I just stared at the notification until it faded from my screen. There's a special kind of silence that comes from unspoken choices. This was mine. They sent me a birth announcement 2 weeks later. Glossy cardstock. A photo of tiny feet. Anna's husband's hand curled around the baby's. Anna's handwriting scribbled on the back. Hope you'll come meet her soon. We're naming her after you. You know, but it wasn't after me, not really. It was after the version of me they preferred. The quiet, the compliant, the background noise to someone else's joy. I didn't send a gift. I didn't call. And when Mom followed up a week later with a voicemail, a sad, performative sigh, layered into each sentence, I deleted it. I didn't even feel guilty anymore. Because healing, I've realized, isn't a loud declaration. It's saying no without defending it. It's not showing up to things that hurt you. It's making peace with being misunderstood. A neighbor of mine, an older woman named Ruth, caught me one morning outside our building. She handed me a coffee she'd made extra. No cream, just how I like it. You've looked lighter lately, she said. Like something let go of you. I smiled. Because it wasn't something. It was them. The apartment's quieter now. No calls, no obligations. Just the sound of my own thoughts settling in a place where they're finally allowed to breathe. Some nights, I still dream of the baby. Not Anna's. Mine. A faceless child in a yellow blanket reaching out. Not in pain, not in fear. Just reaching. And I wake up without crying. I don't clutch my stomach like I used to. I just breathe and let the image stay with me, like a memory that never needed to be shared to be real. Last week, I walked by the boutique where I once bought those socks. It was closed for renovation. In the window, a hand-painted sign read, "Everything has seasons. Let go gently." I stood there for a long time. Then I turned around and walked home. They'll never say they were sorry. Not really. They'll tell themselves I'm sensitive, dramatic, that I overreacted. They'll keep gathering without me, smiling into group photos, pretending the shape of me isn't missing from the frame. But I don't need an apology to choose peace. I just need distance. And I've finally given that to myself. Winter came, slowly that year, the kind of cold that crept in through the floorboards and settled behind the curtains like a secret. But for once I welcomed it. It made the quiet feel earned. I began keeping a routine, not rigid, just grounding. Coffee at 8, a walk by 9, painting in the afternoon light when it was softest. I let the world shrink into manageable corners. They hadn't reached out in weeks. No holiday invitations, no passive-aggressive voicemails. Maybe they'd stopped trying, or maybe they'd finally realized I meant it this time. The distance wasn't a pause. It was a perimeter. I went to the attic of my old building that afternoon. The landlord let me use it as storage after I moved in. Said most people never asked. I hadn't gone up there since summer. The air was thick with dust and the scent of forgotten things. I found my old box tucked in the corner. Inside, the mirror selfie. The first journal entry after I lost the baby. The unused thank you cards I once planned to send to people who never showed up. And one small sealed envelope. The letter I'd written to her. My baby. A letter I never read aloud. I had written it in the hospital, hand trembling, knowing no one would ever hear it. But I did. I brought it downstairs, lit a candle, and read it to myself by the window. Word by word. No interruptions. No competing joy. No white dresses. No baby. Name announcements. Just my voice. And finally, my grief, with space to breathe. The next morning, I mailed it. Not to anyone I knew. I found a nonprofit that collects letters from grieving mothers and buries them beneath wildflowers in the spring. It felt right. Not revenge. Not closure. Just planting something no one else could touch. A week later, a message came, Anna. Just a single line. I'm sorry. I didn't know you were still hurting. I stared at it. For once, there was no GIF attached, no emoji to soften the edge. Just words. Too late. Too small. I didn't reply. Not out of bitterness, just because I was done explaining my pain to people who only believed in their own. I left, my phone on the nightstand, and opened my window instead. Snow was beginning to fall. Light. Barely there. But enough. The snow kept falling. It layered everything. Cars, rooftops, sidewalks, until even the sharpest corners seemed softened. I took it as a sign. That healing doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it just accumulates. Quietly. That morning, I went to the park. I wore the yellow scarf I'd knit during my recovery, the one no one ever asked about, even though I wore it like armor. The air bit gently at my cheeks. Children were playing, their laughter high and unbothered, the kind that didn't demand your attention, just filled the gaps where silence once lived. I sat on a bench beneath an old tree and pulled out the second journal, the one I started after I stopped answering their calls. Its pages had begun to fill with things that weren't about grief. A painting I wanted to try. A recipe I'd made up and actually liked. Even the name of a book club someone from the art store invited me to join. I hadn't said yes yet, but I hadn't said no. That was the difference now. Choices were mine again. I received a package that afternoon. A pale pink box, ribboned in gold. From Anna. No note. Just a framed photo of the baby. Elena. Her eyes were closed, her mouth curled slightly in sleep. I looked at her for a long time. Not with jealousy, not with rage, just resignation. She wasn't mine, not the baby, not the name, not the family. They were trying to preserve in curated snapshots. I wrapped the frame back in its tissue, gently, and set it inside a drawer I rarely used. Not to forget, just to protect myself from the weight of pretending I was ever truly part of that story. That night, I made soup from scratch. Chopped vegetables slowly. Let the broth simmer for hours. It was nothing special. No occasion. No one to serve but myself. But as I sat at the table, the bowl warming my palms, I realized it was the first dinner in months where I didn't feel invisible at the table. Because no one else was here to shrink me, to rewrite the moment, to make it about them. I fell asleep early. No dreams, just rest. The next morning, I made a final list. Not of resolutions or goals, just names. People I hadn't spoken to since the service. People who hadn't reached out unless it was about Anna. People who only remembered me in proximity to her. And then I blocked them. One by one. It wasn't dramatic. It was just necessary. A final voicemail came in around noon. Mom's voice again. More careful this time. I know you're still upset. But Anna's been struggling too. She asks about you all the time. Maybe this could be the moment that brings us back together. I listened to it twice, not for clarity, but to be sure I wasn't imagining the way they still didn't say my child's name. Not once. I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I brewed another cup of tea, opened the windows again, and let the cold fill the room. Not to punish, but to remind me I could choose what warmth I let back in. Spring returned before I realized winter had gone. Not with blooming flowers or sudden warmth, just the slow melting of ice in places I hadn't thought to check. The corners of the windows, the edge of the old rug near my bed. The ache in my chest when I saw a stroller on the street. It didn't vanish, but it no longer cracked me open. The neighbor's twins were born in late March. 2 girls, healthy, loud, loved. Ruth knocked on my door one morning with a container of lentil stew and asked if I'd help her pick out books for the baby. Shower basket, I did, and I added one of my own. A copy of The Snowy Day, the book I'd once bought for mine. She didn't know the meaning behind it. She just smiled and said, "You always have good taste." That was enough. On what would have been my due date, I took the bus to the coast. It wasn't planned. I just woke up that morning and felt a tug. Not sorrow, not desperation, just the need to be somewhere bigger than my grief. The shore was almost empty. Just me, some wind, and a stretch of sea that didn't care who had left or who had stayed. I took the letter I'd rewritten twice, the one I'd never sent, the one with her name in it, and I buried it in the sand with the tide brushing my boots. There was no ceremony, no audience, just me, whispering one last goodbye, and meaning it. I didn't tell them where I went. Mom texted once that week, said Anna had started therapy, said she was asking less about me these days, said it like that was proof she was getting better, as if forgetting me was somehow a sign of healing. I didn't respond. I moved again in early summer, a smaller place, more sunlight, fewer echoes. I kept only what I wanted. The yellow scarf, a few canvases, my journal, and a single photo from childhood. Me at 5, sitting in a sandbox, alone but smiling. I framed it, hung it by the front door. So I'd remember. Even before all this, before Anna, before the eulogy, before the quiet revenge of not showing up, there was a version of me who was whole, who was enough, and who knew how to be alone without it meaning less. I didn't hate them, not anymore. Hate is a rope, and I was finally learning to let go of all the knots they'd tied inside me. They can keep the gatherings, the stories, the edited history. I'll keep the silence, the peace, the little stubborn light I reclaimed when no one was watching. And that was enough. Not revenge, not closure they'd understand, just a final, quiet freedom